Crash! Security alarms shrieked through Oakland International as FBI agents stormed Gate 23. Passengers scattered like startled birds. In the center of it all, 11-year-old Naomi Carter stood perfectly still, her small hands gripping a boarding pass that had just triggered a federal investigation. Bang! The cabin door slammed shut behind her as she was escorted off the plane in handcuffs. The youngest billionaire in American history, now branded a suspected terrorist. But wait, how did a child genius who revolutionized education end up in federal custody? The answer lies 3 hours earlier, when everything started with a simple boarding pass and a seat that wasn't supposed to be hers. The morning sun carved sharp angles through the glass walls of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Terminal C buzzed with the usual chaos, rolling suitcases, crying babies, delayed flight announcements echoing off polished floors. But threading through this ordinary madness walked an extraordinary pair. Naomi Carter moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had already conquered the world before her 12th birthday. Her natural hair was pulled back in neat braids, adorned with small gold beads that caught the light as she walked. She wore a crisp white blazer over dark jeans, professional but age-appropriate, the uniform of a CEO who still had to remind adults she belonged in boardrooms. Her father, Marcus Carter, walked beside her with the protective grace of a man who had watched his daughter face down venture capitalists and tech moguls before she lost her first tooth. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, his dark suit impeccable. To strangers, they looked like any other father-daughter duo heading to California for a weekend trip. They had no idea they were watching the youngest self-made billionaire in history. "Daddy, do you think they'll ask about the acquisition again?" Naomi's voice carried the strange mix of childhood innocence and boardroom sharpness that had become her trademark. Marcus smiled, adjusting the strap of her small leather briefcase. "Probably, but remember what we practiced. Let them underestimate me, then show them why RiseEd is worth more than their entire portfolio." She had learned this lesson the hard way. At 9 years old, when she first pitched RiseEd to investors, they'd patted her head and asked her if she wanted juice boxes during the presentation. By 10, those same investors were begging to buy shares in her company. By 11, she was worth $1.2 billion. RiseEd wasn't just another app. It was a complete educational ecosystem that adapted to each student's learning style in real time. Traditional classrooms taught everyone the same way. Naomi's platform understood that Maria learned math through music, while Kevin grasped science through storytelling. The AI didn't just track progress, it predicted potential. Within 2 years, RiseEd had transformed over 8,000 schools across America. Dropout rates plummeted. Test scores soared. Most importantly, kids who had been labeled slow learners discovered they were actually gifted, they just learned differently. But success at 11 came with a price most adults couldn't handle, let alone a child. "Gate 15, Marcus announced, checking their boarding passes. "First class, just like always." Naomi had earned that first-class seat. After her third 18-hour workday in a row, Marcus insisted she fly comfortably. "Billionaires don't squeeze into economy," he'd said, though he knew the real reason was simpler. His daughter deserved every comfort he could give her. As they approached the gate, Naomi noticed the stares. A cluster of business travelers glanced from her boarding pass to her face, their expressions cycling through confusion, disbelief, and barely concealed resentment. "Is that really her seat?" whispered a woman in pearls and a Chanel suit. "Probably a mistake, or maybe Daddy bought it for her." Naomi had heard variations of this conversation 1,000 times. In boardrooms, at conferences, in first-class lounges, the same doubt, the same assumptions. A little black girl couldn't possibly belong in spaces reserved for important people. She straightened her blazer and lifted her chin. Let them wonder. Let them doubt. In 2 hours, she'd be in San Francisco closing a deal that would expand RiseEd into international markets. Let them try to explain that away. The boarding announcement crackled through the speakers. Now boarding all passengers in first class and priority seating. Marcus handed over their passes to the gate agent, a young woman with kind eyes who smiled warmly at Naomi.
Flying to San Francisco for business or pleasure? For business, Naomi replied confidently. I'm meeting with the Department of Education about expanding RiseEd into underserved communities. The gate agent's eyes widened slightly, not with doubt, but with recognition. You're Naomi Carter. My daughter's school uses RiseEd. It changed her life. For a moment, the whispers and stares faded. This was why Naomi had built her company, not for the money or the recognition, but for children like this woman's daughter, who deserved every opportunity to succeed. That's what we're here for, Naomi said simply. They boarded the plane, moving down the narrow aisle toward the front of the cabin. First class on this flight was intimate, just 8 seats arranged in pairs, each one spacious enough for the most demanding executives. Naomi checked her boarding pass one last time. Seat 2A, first class. She had paid for this seat with her own money, earned from countless hours of coding, pitching, and building something revolutionary. She belonged here. But as they reached row 2, Naomi stopped dead in her tracks. Someone was already sitting in her seat. A middle-aged white man in an expensive navy suit had spread himself comfortably across 2A, his leather briefcase occupying the seat beside him, his carry-on tucked neatly in the overhead compartment. He glanced up from his tablet as Naomi approached, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to something darker. Naomi looked at her boarding pass again, then at the seat number above his head. No mistake. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely, her voice carrying the practiced patience of someone used to correcting adult mistakes. "I think you're in my seat." But the man's response would shatter more than just her travel plans. It would expose a conspiracy that had been building for months, with Naomi Carter squarely in its crosshairs.
The man in seat 2A didn't even look up from his tablet. Thomas Voss, though Naomi didn't know his name yet, had the kind of face that belonged in corner offices and country clubs. Sharp cheekbones, steel gray hair slicked back with precision, and cold blue eyes that had perfected the art of looking through people rather than at them. "This is my seat," he said flatly, not bothering with eye contact. Naomi blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. In her world of billion-dollar negotiations in corporate boardrooms, adults might underestimate her, but they rarely ignored basic courtesy. "Sir, I think there's been a mistake," she said, holding up her boarding pass. "This is seat 2A, and that's what's printed on my ticket." Now Voss looked up, his gaze traveling slowly from her braided hair to her business attire, landing finally on the boarding pass in her small hands. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not amusement, but something far more unpleasant. "Not today, sweetheart." The word "sweetheart" dripped with condescension, designed to reduce the youngest billionaire in America to just another child who didn't know her place. Around them, other passengers began to notice the commotion. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Marcus Carter stepped closer, his voice calm but carrying an edge that suggested years of protecting his daughter from exactly this kind of encounter. "Sir, my daughter has a valid ticket for that seat. Perhaps you could check yours?" Voss finally stood, and his full height, easily 6'2", was clearly meant to intimidate. He smoothed his suit jacket and addressed Marcus while pointedly ignoring Naomi. "I paid good money for this seat, and I'm not moving for anyone." His emphasis on anyone made it clear he meant something more specific. Especially not for some kid playing dress-up. The cabin fell silent, except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of baggage being loaded. Passengers in nearby rows craned their necks, some pulling out phones. Others shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the tension but uncertain whether to intervene. A flight attendant appeared, her nameplate reading Jennifer. She was young, probably new to the job, and her professional smile faltered as she assessed the situation.
"Is there a problem here?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Yes," Naomi said clearly, her voice carrying despite her small stature. "This gentleman is sitting in my assigned seat. I have my boarding pass right here." She handed over the pass with the same confidence she'd shown presenting to the U.S. Secretary of Education just last month. Jennifer examined it carefully, then checked the seat number against the overhead display. "This does show seat 2A, she confirmed, looking uncertain. Voss produced his own boarding pass with theatrical flourish. "And this shows the same thing." Jennifer's eyes widened as she compared the two tickets. Both clearly displayed 2A First Class in bold letters. Her training hadn't prepared her for this. "That's impossible," she stammered. "Our system doesn't allow duplicate seat assignments." "Obviously, it does. And since I was here first, possession is 9/10 of the law." Marcus stepped forward, his calm beginning to crack. "This is ridiculous. The tickets have timestamps. My daughter checked in online yesterday. We can verify this." "Look," Voss said, his voice taking on the tone of someone explaining simple concepts to children. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm a platinum frequent flyer with this airline. I've been flying first class longer than she's been alive." He gestured dismissively at Naomi. "Maybe there's a nice seat in coach where she'd be more comfortable." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Several passengers shifted in their seats, some beginning to murmur amongst themselves. A woman in row 3 whispered loudly enough to be heard. "Well, she is awfully young for first class." Naomi felt heat rise in her cheeks, but not from embarrassment, from anger. She had faced down venture capitalists, testified before Congress, and been featured on the cover of Forbes. She would not be diminished by a man who probably couldn't even explain what her company did. "I'm not moving," she said quietly, but with steel in her voice that made several nearby passengers look up in surprise. Voss laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Excuse me?" "I said I'm not moving. This is my seat, purchased with my money for my business trip. I belong here." "Your money?" Voss' eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "And what exactly do you do for work, little girl? Lemonade stand?" The question was meant to humiliate, but Naomi had learned long ago that her greatest weapon against condescension was simple truth. "I'm the founder and CEO of Rise Ed. We're a billion-dollar educational technology company that's revolutionizing how children learn. Perhaps you've heard of us. We're transforming schools in 47 states." A ripple of recognition moved through the cabin. Several passengers began whispering excitedly. Phones appeared, and someone in row 4 audibly gasped, "Oh my God, that's really her!" But Voss's expression didn't change. If anything, his smirk deepened. "How interesting," he said slowly. "And here I thought children were supposed to be in school, not pretending to run companies." The words hit like a slap, not because they were creative or particularly cutting, but because they revealed something darker. This wasn't ignorance or casual prejudice. This was deliberate. Jennifer, the flight attendant, looked between them helplessly, clearly out of her depth. Other crew members were beginning to gather, sensing a situation that required management intervention. Marcus placed a protective hand on Naomi's shoulder. "This conversation is over. My daughter has a valid ticket and she will be sitting in her assigned seat." "Actually," Voss said, settling deeper into 2A, "I don't think she will." He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. To observers, it might have looked like he was texting or checking email. But what Thomas Voss was actually doing would transform this simple seating dispute into something far more dangerous. Because Thomas Voss wasn't just another arrogant passenger throwing his weight around. He was a senior executive at Edutech Systems, RiseEd's largest competitor, and he had been waiting months for exactly this kind of opportunity. The message he sent would reach air traffic control within minutes. Anonymous tip: underage passenger traveling under suspicious circumstances, possible identity fraud involving minor and adult male companion, Flight 447 to San Francisco. As Voss hit send, he looked up at Naomi with a smile that never reached his eyes. You know what? You're right. This isn't about a seat at all. If you believe what Naomi went through was unfair, then don't just sit in silence. Hit subscribe. And if you can't subscribe, at least drop a comment below. Because staying quiet is how injustice wins.
Jennifer Rodriguez had been a flight attendant for exactly 73 days. Fresh out of training, she had memorized every protocol, every emergency procedure, every customer service script. But none of her manuals had prepared her for this moment, standing between an 11-year-old billionaire and a man who radiated the kind of entitlement that came with decades of getting his way. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your ID along with your boarding pass," she said, trying to project authority she didn't feel. Voss made a show of sighing dramatically before producing a driver's license. "Thomas Voss," he announced, as if the name should mean something. "And as I mentioned, I'm platinum status with this airline. Perhaps you'd like to verify that as well?" Jennifer's hands trembled slightly as she examined the documents. The ID was legitimate, the name matched the boarding pass, but something felt wrong. She had dealt with difficult passengers before, but this felt different, calculated rather than simply rude. "The system shows both passengers checked in for the same seat," she said carefully. "This shouldn't be possible." "Systems glitch," Voss said dismissively. "Happens all the time. The question is, who actually deserves to sit here?" His gaze swept pointedly from Naomi's young face to the first-class cabin around them. Naomi stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I can settle this easily. My company's travel department has all the confirmation numbers and booking details. We can call them right now." "Your company?" Voss's laugh was sharp. "Sweetheart, playing CEO doesn't make you one. Where are your parents? Shouldn't they be handling this?" "I am handling this," Naomi replied evenly. "And this is my father." She gestured to Marcus, whose jaw was set in a way that suggested he was exercising considerable restraint. Around them, the cabin had divided into unofficial camps. Some passengers whispered sympathetically about the poor little girl, while others muttered about entitled children and parents who don't know their place. Phones were recording, social media posts were being crafted, and the situation was rapidly spiraling beyond Jennifer's control. "Look," Jennifer said, trying to regain order, "I need to call my supervisor. This is beyond—" "No need," Voss interrupted smoothly. "I have a simple solution. The child and her father can take my original seat in Economy Plus, row 14. Very comfortable. Problem solved." His tone suggested this was remarkably generous, a benevolent gesture from someone doing them a favor. But Naomi caught the subtle emphasis on child and father, words chosen to diminish and dismiss. "That's not how this works," Marcus said firmly. "My daughter paid for first class. She has every right to sit in first class." "Rights?" Voss's eyebrows rose. "What exactly gives an 11-year-old the right to first class? Some participation trophy? Daddy's credit card?" The questions were designed to provoke, and they worked. Naomi felt anger building in her chest, not the hot, reactive anger of childhood, but the cold, focused fury she had learned to channel in boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. "What gives me the right," she said quietly, "is the same thing that gives anyone the right to first class. I paid for it, with money I earned, from a company I built, While you were probably sitting in meetings talking about innovation, I was actually creating it." A passenger in row 3 began to clap slowly, and others joined in. Someone called out, "You go, girl!" But Voss remained unmoved. "Very rehearsed," he said approvingly. "Did Daddy teach you that speech? But here's the thing about the real world. It doesn't care about your little pretend company or your make-believe success. What matters is who actually belongs here." The word belongs hit like a physical blow. Around them, the applause died as passengers absorbed the full implication of what Voss had just said. Jennifer knew she was witnessing something that would likely end up on the evening news. Her training kicked in and she reached for her radio to call the captain. But before she could speak, Voss held up his hand. "Actually, I think I'll make this easy for everyone," he said, pulling out his phone again. "I'm going to call airline security. Let them sort out who has the legitimate ticket and who's trying to pull some kind of scheme." The word scheme hung in the air like a threat. Naomi felt something cold settle in her stomach as she watched Voss dial. "Airport security? Yes. I'd like to report a suspicious situation on Flight 447 to San Francisco. Gate 15. There's a situation with fraudulent documentation, and, well, I think you should see for yourself." He hung up before anyone could respond, his smile widening as he settled back into seat 2A. "They'll be here shortly," he announced to the cabin. "We can let the professionals decide who really belongs in first class." Jennifer's radio crackled to life. "Flight 447, this is ground control. We're holding your departure pending a security investigation. Do not begin boarding additional passengers." Marcus grabbed Naomi's hand instinctively, but she squeezed back with surprising strength. "Daddy," she whispered, "he planned this." She was right, but what neither of them knew was that Thomas Voss's plan went far deeper than a simple seat dispute. Because while they waited for security, his second phone call was already being processed, the anonymous tip to air traffic control that would turn this confrontation into something far more dangerous. As passengers began pulling out phones to record what was happening, as Jennifer radioed frantically for her supervisor, as Marcus tried to shield his daughter from the growing chaos, Naomi Carter stood perfectly still in the aisle of Flight 447. She was 11 years old. She was worth over $1 billion. She had revolutionized education for millions of children, and she was about to learn that none of that mattered when someone decided she didn't belong. The security team was already walking down the jetway toward their gate, and what happened next would change everything.
Heavy boots slammed against the jetway. The metal shook under the weight of security rushing toward the plane. Then the intercom came alive, static hissing before the captain's voice cut through the cabin. "Flight 447 is returning to the gate. All passengers remain seated. Do not move." Gasps rippled down the aisle. People stiffened in their seats. Some reached for phones. Others gripped their armrests like the plane was about to drop from the sky. And then the captain added one more line, colder than the first. "This order concerns a specific passenger." Every head turned. Every eye locked onto Naomi Carter. She froze. Not because she was guilty, because the weight of accusation fell on her like a stone. 11 years old, billionaire, CEO, and now branded a threat at 30,000 feet. Her father leaned close, his whisper low but sharp. "They're not after your seat anymore. They're after you." Naomi's heart pounded so hard, it felt like the cabin could hear it. She whispered back, "Daddy, they think I don't belong here." The young flight attendant clutched her radio like it was a lifeline. Her voice trembled as she relayed the message. "Ground control flagged a passenger. Possible fraudulent documentation. Possible identity issue." Marcus's eyes flared. His voice snapped. "Identity issue? My daughter's face is on Forbes. She built a company that transforms schools across this country, and you call this an identity issue?" The attendant swallowed hard. "Sir, those aren't my words. That's what came from the ground." Marcus repeated it under his breath. The ground. A word that now felt
poisonous. Naomi looked down at the boarding pass clutched in her hand. Her name, her seat number. Proof. Real proof. Yet it meant nothing in this moment. Across from her, Voss leaned back in 2A. Smug satisfaction spread across his face. Around him, whispers grew. Isn't that the kid from TV? Probably a scam. Maybe they faked the documents. The cabin was tilting, not physically, but against her. The captain's voice returned, calm but loaded. Please remain calm while ground security resolves this situation. The words stung. This situation, as though Naomi herself was the danger, not the man smirking inches away. Marcus rose halfway, his broad shoulders blocking the aisle. His voice carried, "You will not touch my child." From 2A came a low chuckle. Voss. Maybe the captain's right. Maybe she doesn't belong here. Gasps, whispers. His poison was spreading. Naomi lifted her chin. Her voice was steady, though small. I worked for this seat. I built my company. I didn't steal anything. Her words carried through the silence, but honesty didn't erase suspicion. Phones rose higher, recording. A woman muttered, 11 years old? CEO? That's impossible. A man in the back scoffed. Her father's probably running some scam. Naomi's throat tightened. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about existence. Her right to stand in spaces the world wanted to push her out of. If this were your daughter, wouldn't you want her story heard? Subscribe. The flight attendant returned, pale and uneasy. Captain says security needs confirmation. Which passenger is Naomi Carter? The words echoed. The aisle went silent. Every phone pointed at her. Naomi inhaled slowly, straightened her blazer. Then she spoke, clear and proud. Yes, that's me. Gasps cut through the air. Some passengers recognized her. Others doubted harder. That's her, the prodigy. One voice shouted. Another sneered, if it's really her, why is she being flagged? Marcus snapped. His patience was gone. This is profiling. A little black girl in first class, and suddenly she's a fraud. You're feeding his lies. He pointed directly at Voss. Voss didn't flinch. He only raised his phone higher, screen glowing with the anonymous report he had already filed. His smile was cold, calculated. Then came the knock, hard, deliberate at the cabin door, metal handle rattling. The captain's voice cut in again. For your safety, federal officers are now boarding this aircraft. Phone shot higher. Some passengers leaned away from Naomi like she carried disease. Naomi squeezed her father's hand. Her whisper carried steel. They want me gone. Her Marcus's reply was sharp, unshakable. Then we fight, with truth, with dignity, like we always have. But before the door opened fully, another voice sliced through the silence. A woman's voice, calm, cold, certain. Mr. Carter, let them come, but know this. He isn't the only one who wants her gone. Marcus turned sharply. His eyes locked on a silver-haired woman seated in economy, Margaret Lawson. And she wasn't just another passenger. The cabin door burst open. Officers stepped inside, scanning the rows. Their eyes locked on Naomi. The whispers died. Silence drowned the cabin. And Naomi Carter, child billionaire, accused fraud, unwanted passenger, was about to face judgment at 30,000 feet.
The cabin door rattled as officers prepared to board. But the story didn't begin there. It began minutes earlier in a cramped airplane lavatory. Thomas Voss stood over the sink, staring into the mirror. To anyone outside, it looked routine, a businessman adjusting his tie before takeoff. But inside that locked door, he pulled out a second phone, a burner. His fingers moved quickly, typing a message that would ignite chaos. Anonymous tip. Passenger Naomi Carter, 11 years old, traveling under suspicious documents, possible fraud, Flight 447, Gate 15. He hit send.
The message raced to air traffic control, planting suspicion that would grow like fire. When Voss unlocked the door and returned to C2A, the trap was already set. Naomi Carter's fate sealed by a lie. EduTech systems, once a giant in digital learning, now crumbling under the weight of a child's invention. Months earlier, Voss had sat at the head of a long table in Chicago. Reports spread before him told the same story. Contracts lost, investors fleeing, schools abandoning EduTech. And at the center of it all was one name, RiseEd. Naomi Carter's company had done in 3 years what EduTech failed to do in 3 decades. It adapted to every child, every classroom. Teachers embraced it. Parents trusted it. Students flourished with it. EduTech was dying, and Voss was drowning with it. "We are being out-engineered by a child," he thundered in that boardroom. "An 11-year-old is dismantling us." No one argued. They didn't have to. The charts spoke louder than words. That night, Voss sat alone in his corner office, staring out at the city lights. He poured a glass of scotch and made a decision. If he couldn't beat her in the market, he would bury her in doubt. People don't need proof, they just need suspicion. He didn't have to destroy RiseEd software. He only had to destroy its symbol, the girl who built it. When he saw her name on the manifest for Flight 447, it felt like fate. This was his chance. One message, one spark, enough to brand her a fraud forever. Back on the plane, Naomi sat trembling under the weight of false accusation. Every glare, every whisper, every phone camera pointed at her, fueled by Voss's lie. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a glitch. It was sabotage. If lies can ruin a child this fast, shouldn't truth spread faster? Subscribe. In Chicago, weeks before, one deputy had asked him quietly, "But what if she really is that good? What if RiseEd just out-innovated us?" Voss's reply was ice. "Then we redefine the battlefield. We don't fight her software, we fight her identity." Doubts were seeded, rumors planted. Was Naomi really the coder, or was her father pulling the strings? Could a child possibly run a billion-dollar empire? One spark. That's all it needed, and he lit it with a burner phone in a lavatory. As the cabin filled with fear and federal officers stepped inside, Voss leaned back in his seat. To everyone else, he was just another passenger inconvenienced by delays. But inside, he was savoring his victory. With a single lie, he had shifted the entire cabin against her. But what Voss didn't know was that he wasn't the only one watching. A silver-haired woman in row 12 had seen him leave the lavatory. She had seen the phone slip into his briefcase. Her name was Margaret Lawson, and unlike the other passengers, she understood exactly what Thomas Voss had done. Margaret leaned back in her seat, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak. Not yet. But she carried a truth that could burn Thomas Voss alive.
Phones rose higher. Passengers fell silent. Their eyes scanned the rows. Then they stopped. On Naomi Carter. "Passenger Naomi Carter," one officer said. His voice wasn't a question, it was an accusation. Naomi froze. 11 years old, founder of RiseEd, the youngest billionaire in America, and now a suspect at 30,000 feet. Her father moved first, standing tall between them. "She's not under investigation. She's a child. What exactly are you accusing her of?" The officer held up a tablet. Anonymous report flagged possible fraudulent documents. Identity fraud. We need verification. Naomi gripped her boarding pass, her name, her seat number, her proof. Yet, it meant nothing. The whispers started again. Fraud? Kids don't run companies. Her father forged it. every word cut like glass. Marcus spoke sharply. Her passport is legitimate. Her ticket was purchased with her own earnings. She has every right to this seat. The officer's tone stayed flat. Then you won't mind if we take her for questioning. Questioning? At 11? Like a criminal? A man in row 5 shook his head. Doesn't add up. No way a kid runs a billion-dollar company. Another passenger muttered, always the same, parents pulling the strings. Naomi's chest burned. She lifted her chin. Her voice was steady. I built Rise Ed. I wrote the code. I pitched the idea. Nobody did it for me. The words hung in the air, but doubt clung tighter than truth. If this was your child, accused in front of strangers, would you stay silent? Subscribe. The officer reached for her passport. Marcus didn't move. His grip stayed firm. You don't snatch from a child, you ask. The officer's jaw tightened. Sir, cooperate or we escalate. From seat 2A, Voss leaned forward, his voice smooth and venomous. Why resist? If everything's real, let them check. Unless you're hiding something. Heads turned again. The suspicion doubled. Naomi whispered to her father. He wants this. He's pulling them against me. Marcus's reply was calm, unshakable. Then we fight with proof. He handed over the documents. The officer studied them in silence. Every second stretched like hours. Finally, he spoke. The documents are authentic. Relief flickered. Then it vanished. Still, he added, a child traveling as a corporate executive raises concerns. Until federal databases confirm, she remains under suspicion. The whispers swelled again. A woman in row 3 rose to her feet. Why should we trust her? Kids don't belong in first class. What's she really doing here? Her voice carried. Murmurs grew. Some nodded. Others stayed quiet, uneasy. Naomi's fingers dug into the armrest, but her voice didn't waver. I'm here because I earned it. Because every child deserves better classrooms. Rise Ed gives them that. Some passengers softened. Others hardened. Doubt still spread. The officer barked, Ma'am, sit down. We'll handle this. But the damage was done. The cabin was a courtroom. Naomi on trial. From 2A, Voss leaned back, a glint in his eye, a smile meant only for her. He had wanted this moment, the whole cabin against her. The officer turned. Until clearance is confirmed, she remains flagged. That's final. The words struck like a gavel. Then, from the back of the plane, another voice rose, calm, certain. Enough. Every head turned. A silver-haired woman walked slowly up the aisle. Her presence commanded attention. Margaret Lawson. You want to know who Naomi Carter is? She said. Then you should also know who Thomas Voss is. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Naomi's eyes widened. Marcus tensed. The officer lifted his hand. Ma'am, sit down. This is official business. Margaret's smile was faint but sharp. Official business? Then maybe you'd like to know who sent the anonymous tip. The cabin froze. Passengers stared between her and Voss. And for the first time, Naomi saw fear flash across his face.
The cabin had gone silent.
All eyes were on the silver-haired woman in the aisle. Margaret Lawson didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You asked who Naomi Carter is," she said. "You should ask who Thomas Voss is." The officer nearest her shifted. "Ma'am, sit down." Margaret didn't move. "If this is official, you'll want the truth recorded." She turned her head just enough for Voss to feel the look. He stopped smiling. Marcus stepped forward, keeping Naomi close. "Who are you?" "Someone who left a firm that funded EduTech," she said. "Someone who's seen how they fight when they're losing." Voss let out a tight laugh. "This is absurd." Margaret's eyes didn't leave him. "You filed the tip. You used a second phone. You returned to 2A with it in your briefcase." A ripple went through the cabin. Passengers leaned into the aisle. Cameras adjusted focus. The officer raised a hand. "Enough speculation." "It isn't speculation," Margaret said. "It's pattern, it's motive, and it's proof." The nearest officer angled toward her. "Proof?" Margaret nodded once. "Emails, memos, a crisis deck labeled Contain Rise Ed. The strategy wasn't to compete, it was to smear. Seed doubt about authorship, question the father's role, push too young to lead narratives, stir the press, trigger flags." Naomi felt the words hit her like wind. She looked up at her father. He didn't blink. The officer kept his voice even. "Where are these documents?" "Stored, time-stamped, backed up off-site." Voss shifted in his seat. "Wild claims, no evidence." Margaret finally turned fully to him. "You remember Chicago, the boardroom, the quarter you lost Arizona and Michigan in a single week. You stood at the head of the table and said, 'We don't fight her software, we fight her identity.'" He opened his mouth, closed it. The cameras caught everything. The officer checked the tablet, then the door. "Produce something now, or this stops." Margaret held up her phone. "Signal is weak, but the metadata you need is on this plane." "How?" he asked. She pointed to the ceiling panel. Cabin logs. Gate camera at DFW. Timestamp of a passenger entering the lavatory 2 minutes before first-class boarding. Manifest shows a duplicate seat issued for 2A. Pull those, then ask him to open his briefcase. Voss sat very still. His jaw tightened. "Check it," someone whispered. "Do it," another voice said. Naomi steadied her breath. "Why help us?" she asked. Margaret's answer was quiet. "Because I stayed silent once, and a good company died. Because the people who lose the most are never the ones who wrote the plan." She looked down at Naomi's small, clenched hands. "And because children shouldn't be put on trial to cover for cowardice." The officer gestured to a flight attendant. "Secure the briefcase in 2A." Voss's voice snapped. "Touch that, and you'll meet my lawyers." The officer didn't flinch. "Sir, remain seated." Voss sank a fraction. Not much. Enough. A murmur rolled across the cabin. Passengers whispered judgments like jurors. "Guilty or not? What do you think? Comment your verdict." Phones caught Naomi's profile as she watched the briefcase lift from the floor. Her heart pounded. Not from fear, something closer to relief. At last, someone else was speaking. The officer placed the case on an empty tray table. "Unlock it." Voss stared back. "No." Margaret's voice stayed calm. "Bottom sleeve, false panel. The phone rests under the contract folder." Voss turned his face to the window. Marcus stepped forward, keeping Naomi close. "Breathe," he said. She did, slow, measured. She felt the weight on her chest ease, the noise of the cabin fade. For a second, she heard only the steady rhythm of her father's voice in her memory. "Keep your center. State the truth. Let them chase the lie." The officer looked at Voss. "Last chance." Silence. "Open it," the officer said to the attendant. Voss jolted. "You have no..." "Sir, remain seated." Voss sank a fraction, not much. Enough. Margaret took 2 small steps closer to Naomi.
She didn't smile. "They'll find something. Maybe not the phone, maybe a slip, a draft of the memo, a printout with a timestamp. Ego leaves ink." Naomi blinked. "Why did you leave them?" Margaret's gaze held steady, because people forget the product is children, not contracts. A few faces in the cabin softened, a few hardened further. If exposing lies matters to you, stand with us. Subscribe. The officer handed over a small black device they'd found under a stiff folder labeled Key Partners. No logo, no case. The kind of phone that slips through scanners when no one looks. He held it up. "Passcode?" Voss's voice dropped to a growl. "This is harassment." Margaret didn't look away. "Check recent outbounds from the last hour. Gate 15, Flight 447, same phrasing you read from your tablet." The officer turned the device, showed it to the camera aimed by half the cabin. He nodded to his partner. "Tag it, bag it." Voss's hands curled into fists on the armrest. Marcus exhaled, but only halfway. He knew battles. He knew people who lost them even when they were right. The lead officer addressed Naomi. "Until we verify, you remain flagged, but you will not be removed from this cabin without cause." A small shift rippled through the rows. Not approval, not outrage, an uneasy middle. Naomi's eyes lifted to Margaret. "What happens now?" Margaret spoke like she'd rehearsed the words for years. "They'll check the gate logs, match times. If they move quickly, the lie dies here. If they drag their feet, it spreads." She paused. "The plan was never to prove you wrong. It was to make you doubt yourself." Naomi swallowed. "I won't." "I know," Margaret said. The officer's radio crackled. He stepped back to listen. His partner kept eyes on the aisle, on the briefcase, on Voss. Margaret turned to the cabin. "You all saw the duplicate seat. You heard the accusation. You watched them find a second phone. You can disagree about first class. You can debate age and work. But you can't build a world where a lie wins because it's louder." A businessman lowered his phone. A woman in row 3 looked away. "Truth should travel faster than the lie. Subscribe." The officer returned to the group. "Gate confirms a lavatory entry 2 minutes before first-class boarding. Same jacket, same briefcase. Camera time matches our passenger list. We're pulling the gate feed." Voss kept his eyes down. A vein ticked in his neck. Margaret glanced at Naomi. "Remember this. People who throw the first stone call it procedure." Naomi nodded once. "People who stand still call it courage." Marcus squeezed her shoulder. The cabin door shifted again. A crew member handed the officer a tablet connected to the gate camera. He pressed play. The video showed a man in a navy suit moving toward the lavatory by the boarding lane, head down, hand on a small black phone. He stepped inside. 91 seconds later, he came out and slid the phone into his briefcase. He froze the frame. The still image held long enough for the cabin to breathe as one. Then something unexpected happened. The officer pinched the screen to zoom in and frowned. There was a second hand in the frame. Not Voss's, another person's reflection caught in the metal edge of the door. A shadow in a ball cap turned just enough to hide a face, holding up their own phone. Margaret's eyes sharpened. "There's your leak," she said. "Or an accomplice," the officer replied. The cabin buzzed again, louder than before. "Who is that? Was someone filming him? Are they 2 of them?" The officer didn't answer. He looked from the frozen frame to Voss, then past him, scanning the rows behind. And Naomi felt the air change. Because for the first time, the cabin wasn't only looking at her. It was looking for someone else. Guilty or not, what's your call? Comment your verdict.
The image froze on the tablet. A navy suit, a burner phone, and a reflection. Another hand, another phone, caught in the shine of the lavatory door. For the first time, suspicion didn't rest on Naomi. It spread across the cabin like cracks in glass. "Who is that?" someone whispered. The officer zoomed in. A cap pulled low, a phone lifted. Whoever it was had been close enough to film Thomas Voss, close enough to know. and they had stayed silent. Voss shifted in his seat. It proves nothing. Shadows, distorted reflections, could be anyone. Margaret Lawson's voice cut across him, calm, steady. Or it could be exactly what I warned you about. Edutech never fights alone. They fund allies, they hire shadows. He may not be the only one playing this game. Gasps spread. Passengers turned, scanning the rows. For the first time, the cabin wasn't only staring at Naomi. Suspicion had company. The officer faced Margaret. You left Edutech. Why speak now? I watched them destroy a company once, she said. It wasn't a competitor. It was an ally. We had a product ready for rural schools. Edutech couldn't beat it, so they buried it. False audits, fake reports, whisper campaigns. It collapsed in months, and I stayed silent. Her eyes hardened. I won't do it again. Naomi's chest tightened. This wasn't just about her. Margaret had lived the cost of silence. Voss snapped. She's bitter. She's lying. She's nothing more than a disgruntled ex-employee. Margaret didn't blink. Pull my resignation letter. 18 months ago. Same week, the smear deck circulated. Phones tilted closer. Passengers whispered louder. Some were siding with Margaret now. The officer radioed. Confirm Lawson's employment. Cross-check resignation. Static. Then a reply. Confirmed. Senior strategist. Resigned 18 months ago. The officer looked back at Voss. His face had gone pale. Margaret turned toward Naomi. They'll tell you you're too young, that your father wrote the code, that a child can't run a billion-dollar company. But it's not about truth. It's about perception. If they turn enough eyes against you, they win. Naomi whispered, so why stand now? Because perception isn't permanent, Margaret said, and children shouldn't be targets of corporate war. Her words carried down the aisle like judgment. Truth should travel faster than lies. Subscribe. The officer's radio crackled again. Partial match found. Internal Edutech memo. Contain RiseEd before scale. The words landed like thunder. Marcus's voice cut in, calm but sharp. There's your proof. Voss barked a laugh. Out of context. Every company defends its market. Margaret's reply was ice. Business doesn't require burner phones in bathrooms. The officer leaned closer to Voss. You'll surrender all devices when we land. You have no warrant, Voss snapped. We gave you probable cause, the officer replied. Cameras caught his every word. The smile Voss had worn all flight was gone. Naomi sat back, trembling, but for the first time, she felt the tide shifting. Margaret wasn't finished. Edutech isn't protecting classrooms. They're protecting investors, TechCore, Stratline, even government liaisons. Billions are at stake if Naomi expands overseas. That's why she's a target. The cabin buzzed louder. This wasn't about one man. It was systemic, a machine built to silence a child who threatened to rewrite their future. Naomi whispered, they were never just after me, they were after the idea. Marcus nodded. And you carry it. The officer's tablet pinged. He frowned. Gate feed shows a second individual near the lavatory. Reflection confirms. Possible accomplice. The cabin stiffened. Margaret swept her gaze across the rows. Her voice dropped. So the question isn't only what Voss did, it's who else on this plane wants Naomi Carter erased. The whispers surged. Passengers shifted in their seats. Phones zoomed in. Fear and suspicion filled the air. Naomi's pulse quickened. For the first time, she wasn't fighting just one man. She was trapped in a cabin where anyone could be part of the plan. The officer zoomed closer on the reflection. A blurred face, a shadow in a cap, watching, recording. And whoever they weren't finished. The image on the tablet stayed frozen. A shadow in a cap, a phone raised, proof that someone else had been watching. The cabin buzzed, then fell silent again. Naomi turned, not to the screen, but to Thomas Voss. "You targeted me," she said. "Say it." He stared past her, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the window. The lead officer stepped closer. "Sir, you're advised to cooperate." Voss finally looked up. "Cooperate with what? A reflection?" He spread his hands. "This is theater." Naomi didn't flinch. "Then tell the truth." Marcus shifted, standing closer to his daughter. Margaret Lawson stayed on her left, her gaze fixed on Voss. The officer placed the tablet on the tray. "You returned from the lavatory with a second device. We recovered a burner from your briefcase. Gate footage shows you holding a phone minutes before boarding. Explain." Voss forced a smirk. "Explain what? That I washed my hands?" A passenger muttered, "We all saw the phone." Margaret stepped in. "Check the recent messages. Flight 447, Gate 15. Voss's eyes flicked, quick and sharp. The officer caught it. The room caught it. Naomi's voice cut through the silence. "When I was 9, your team laughed during my demo. You were in the back row. You checked your watch while I wrote code live." Voss sneered. "Children don't build companies." "I didn't ask permission," Naomi said. "I built answers." Some passengers nodded. Others looked away, uneasy. If truth matters more than excuses, subscribe. The officer's radio crackled. "Outbound message confirmed. Burner phone flagged Naomi Carter. Suspicious documents. Flight 447. Time-stamped 10 minutes before boarding." The cabin gasped. Marcus's voice was low and steady. "There's your intent." Voss leaned forward. "Hotlines get tips every day. It's responsible to report concerns." Margaret cut him off. "You planted the concerns. The tip was just the spark." Voss turned his glare on her. "You left Edutech and now you want revenge." Margaret's voice stayed calm. "Not revenge. Repentance." Naomi stepped closer. "You don't think I belong. Not because of my age, because you think the future needs permission from people like you." Voss said nothing. The silence was louder than denial. A ripple moved through the passengers. Some pulled their phones closer. Others murmured, "Guilty or not guilty? What do you think?" From row 12, a phone buzzed. Quick. A hand shoved it under a jacket. The officer's partner moved instantly. "Sir, stand up." The man in the cap hesitated, then rose. He handed over the phone. The officer scrolled. "Video, Gate 15, Navy suit entering the lavatory, file labeled, send to V." Gasps erupted. "Play it!" a passenger shouted. The officer didn't. He turned to Voss. "Do you know the sender?" Voss's answer was too fast. "No." "Then why the initial?" the officer asked. Voss stared at the seatback, lips pressed tight. Naomi's voice was steady. "When I launched our first pilot, a teacher wrote me. She said her student finally learned fractions through drums. He'd failed twice before. He passed that semester. That's what Rise Ed does." Her voice carried. "And that's what you tried to stop." For the first time, Voss looked worn. Not sorry, just tired. Naomi held his gaze. "Why me? Say the truth." Voss's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The officer's partner returned. "Name of the man in the cap. Consultant for Stratline Capital." Margaret's jaw tightened. "TechCore Sister Fund." Naomi whispered, "The network." Marcus whispered back, "The motive." The officer faced Voss again. "Are you connected to this subcontractor?" Voss gave no answer. "Do you own this tip?" The officer pressed. Voss stared at the floor. At last he muttered, "I filed a concern. That's all." Margaret's reply was sharp. "So yes." The cabin erupted in whispers, some furious, some satisfied. Phones captured every word. "If lies can spread this fast, truth deserves to spread faster. Subscribe." The officer collected both phones. "These devices will be logged. Interviews continue after landing. Until then, remain seated." He turned to Naomi. "You remain flagged, pending full clearance, but you will not be removed." Naomi nodded. "Not victory, not yet, but enough." She looked straight at Voss. "You tried to make me doubt myself." His voice was low. "Did it work?" Naomi didn't look away. "No."
The intercom crackled. The captain's voice filled the cabin, measured but strained. "Attention, passengers.
By directive of Federal Command, Flight 447 is ordered to remain grounded. Officers will conduct additional procedures before we are cleared. A heavy silence spread. Every passenger understood this was no longer routine. Naomi gripped the armrest. Grounded. Federal Command. She wasn't just flagged now. She was a case. Marcus leaned close. They're tightening the net. Margaret's eyes narrowed, which means someone wants this bigger than a plane dispute. The lead officer conferred with his partner. Their radios hissed. Words like containment, secondary review, high-level clearance carried through. Passengers whispered, "What does it mean? Are we safe? Is she really the reason?" Every whisper circled back to Naomi. Voss finally spoke. "Good. Now we'll get real answers. Maybe then everyone will see the fraud for what she is." Naomi turned slowly. Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut the cabin. "You tipped them off, and you're proud of it." Voss leaned back. "Truth doesn't fear review." Margaret's voice snapped. "Lies don't either, because lies don't expect to be caught." The officer silenced them with a raised hand. "Enough. Federal Command has ordered a ground investigation team to board this plane. No one leaves until they arrive." A murmur swept through the rows. Anxiety. Anger. Phones recording every word. Naomi's pulse quickened. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was escalation. "Daddy," she whispered, "what if this ruins everything?" Marcus squeezed her hand. "It only ruins you if you believe them. Don't." The officer's tablet buzzed. He scanned it, his brow tightening. Orders updated. All electronics must be secured. Devices off. No transmissions. Gasps broke out. "No way. They can't. My job's on this phone." The officer's tone cut through. "It's not optional. Compliance required immediately." Margaret stiffened. "They want to stop the leaks." Naomi whispered, "Or stop the truth." If power can silence with one command, voices must rise louder. Subscribe. Two attendants moved down the aisle with bags. "Phones off. Place them inside." Passengers hesitated, torn between fear and defiance. One man muttered, "This is illegal." Another handed his phone over anyway. When the attendant reached Voss, he smiled thinly. "Of course." He slid his phone inside without hesitation, too smoothly. Margaret noticed. He kept one. Checked the briefcase again. The officer looked sharply at Voss. Voss met his gaze with the calm of a man trained to lie. Naomi's heart raced. "They'll strip the evidence," she whispered. Marcus leaned in. "Only if we let them." The officer halted the collection. "Hold. No devices until we verify duplicates." The tension thickened. Half the passengers clutched phones tighter. Others stared at Naomi like she was costing them time, money, safety. Voss's smirk deepened. He thrived in the chaos. The intercom cracked again. The captain's voice was lower now. "Passengers, please remain calm. Federal Command has instructed we delay further communication. We await a direct team on the jetway." Marcus frowned. "Delay communication?" Margaret's jaw tightened. They don't just want her flagged, they want her silenced. Naomi felt every eye on her. Not curiosity anymore, not even suspicion. Fear. She swallowed hard. "They're turning everyone against me." Marcus's grip steadied her. "Then you speak, loud, clear, before they erase your voice." Naomi rose from her seat. Small frame, small voice. But in that moment, the cabin hushed. "I am Naomi Carter. I built Rise Ed. I've helped children in 47 states learn better, faster, stronger. And I am not a fraud." Her voice rang down the aisle. Some passengers shifted. Some looked away. Others nodded slowly.
Voss scoffed. Speeches won't save you. Margaret's eyes didn't leave him. Truth already has. The officer's radio hissed again. This time the words were crisp. Team en route. 5 minutes. Secure target until extraction. The word hit Naomi like ice. Target. Marcus stood. She's not a target. She's a child. The officer didn't meet his eyes. He only repeated, Remain seated. They'll be here soon. Naomi's breath caught. Extracted. Like cargo. If a child genius can be silenced, what chance does truth have? Comment your answer. The jetway rattled again. Heavy boots. Closer this time. Passengers shifted uneasily, sensing the weight of power approaching. Naomi sat, hands clenched in her lap, Marcus's arm around her. Margaret standing just behind, eyes sharp, unyielding. Voss closed his eyes, as if savoring the moment. The door latch turned. Metal creaked. The team had arrived. But as the door cracked open, the officer's radio barked one more message. Urgent. Commanding. Change of orders. Immediate priority shift. Secondary subject identified. The officer froze. He repeated it aloud. Secondary subject identified. The cabin gasped. Heads turned. And Naomi realized, for the first time, the next name called might not be hers.
The cabin door swung wide. Federal agents stepped in, black jackets marked with bold letters. Their presence pulled the air out of the room. Every passenger shrank back into their seats. Phones froze in trembling hands. The lead agent's voice cut through. Firm. Cold. Remain seated. No one moves. Naomi's heart hammered. She braced for her name, but the officer repeated the last message. Secondary subject identified. Confusion rippled down the aisle. Whispers rose. Another one? Who else? What does that mean? Naomi gripped her father's arm. They're not just here for me. Marcus's jaw clenched. Stay calm. The agent scanned the rows. His eyes didn't land on Naomi, not first, not even second. They stopped on Margaret Lawson. Ma'am, he said, stand. The cabin gasped. Naomi's breath caught. Margaret didn't flinch. She rose slowly, her silver hair catching the overhead light. She said quietly, I expected this. Voss's smirk returned, thin and poisonous. Of course, the disgruntled insider, always the real problem. Naomi's voice burst out, No! She's helping me! She told the truth! The agent didn't waver. Margaret Lawson, you are ordered to step forward for questioning. Marcus stepped in front of Naomi. On what grounds? The agent replied without emotion. Leaking classified documents. Unauthorized possession of corporate records under federal seal. The cabin erupted. Passengers muttered, shouted, filmed. Some believed, others doubted. The chaos fed itself. Margaret raised her chin. They don't want truth spoken. They want it buried. She turned to Naomi. Her voice dropped low, meant only for her. Don't break. Not now. Naomi's eyes burned. They'll take you away. Margaret gave a faint smile. If they silence me, they prove me right. If whistleblowers can vanish this fast, who defends the next truth? Subscribe.
The cabin door had barely sealed after Margaret's removal when the radio flared again. Proceed with primary extraction. Every head turned. Every eye swung back to Naomi Carter. Her heart pounded in her chest. Extraction. That was the word they used. Like she was cargo. Marcus rose instantly. His voice thundered. "You're not touching her!" The lead agent's stare was unblinking. "Sir, sit down." "She's a child," Marcus shot back. "You can't treat her like this." "She's a subject," the agent said. "Orders from above." Naomi gripped her father's arm. "Daddy, don't. Not now." But her voice shook. The passengers murmured like a jury in chaos. Are they really taking her? She's 11. Maybe she's dangerous. Or maybe they're covering something up. The split cut deeper. The cabin no longer felt like a plane. It felt like a trial without a judge. Voss leaned back in 2A, smug satisfaction etched across his face. At last, justice served. Naomi turned, her eyes burning. This isn't justice, this is fear. The agents moved closer. Their boots struck the floor in rhythm. Heavy, final. One held cuffs. The sight alone stole the breath from the room. Naomi stood, small, straight, defiant. "I am Naomi Carter," her voice rang down the aisle. "I built RiseEd. I help children learn. I belong here." The cabin froze. Some passengers lowered their phones. Others raised them higher. The story wasn't just being lived anymore. It was being broadcast. If you believe her voice matters more than their silence, subscribe now. The agent reached for her wrist. Marcus blocked the grab. Not without a reason, not without proof. The officer lifted the burner phone bag. "We have enough." Margaret's voice echoed in Naomi's memory. "They don't want truth spoken. They want it buried." Naomi inhaled deeply. Fear weighed heavy, but conviction steadied her. She looked around the cabin, at the cameras, at the strangers staring, at the children watching through screens across the world. "They think they can silence me," she said. "But I am not afraid." Her voice cracked, then hardened. "Are you?" Gasps, murmurs, and then a ripple of sound. Applause. First one passenger, then another, then a wave rising through the cabin. The agents hesitated. Power shifted for a breath. Naomi's eyes locked on Voss. "You built your empire on fear. I built mine on children's hope. Guess which one lasts longer?" Voss's smirk faltered. The agents snapped, breaking the moment. "Enough. Proceed." Two agents moved forward. Marcus braced. Naomi didn't move. Then the intercom crackled again. The captain's voice cut through, sharp and shaken. "Hold all actions. Federal directive updated." The agents froze. The cabin fell silent. The captain continued. "Primary extraction suspended. Command review pending. New instruction. Detain both subjects until further notice." Both. Naomi's breath caught. Margaret had been taken. Now they wanted her too. But suspended meant one thing. For the first time all day, doubt was on their side. Marcus gripped Naomi's hand. "This isn't over." Naomi nodded. Her voice was quiet but strong. "No, it's just begun." The cabin buzzed with questions. Phones streamed live. The world was watching. And somewhere beyond the cockpit, in an office far above the clouds, someone was pulling strings neither Naomi nor Voss could yet see. The agents lowered their hands. The door stayed locked. The flight remained grounded. Naomi Carter stood in the aisle, still free, still watched, still fighting. And the question hung heavy over everyone on board. Was she the target or the spark of something much larger?